Hello, welcome to the Monetizing Innovation Podcast, where we dive into the minds of trailblazing leaders transforming the future of healthcare, technology, and business growth. I'm your host, John Holcomb. Today, we're joined by Zachary Ducharme. He's a growth oriented CEO, turnaround expert, and medtech marketplace innovator. Zachary's journey from rebuilding Pipeline Medical to launching breakthrough SaaS platforms and scaling to 50x growth is nothing short of remarkable. We'll unpack his strategies, mindset, and the real lessons behind capital efficient, tech enabled innovation. Let's explore what it really takes to monetize breakthrough ideas in today's evolving landscape. Thank you, Zach, so much for joining us today.
Yeah, happy to be here, John.
Yeah, really appreciate the opportunity. I think with some of your work and background, I think our listeners would really be interested, in some of your journey and some of the challenges that you faced along the way.
Yeah, I mean, happy to divulge, give you some hopefully some tidbits that people can take away.
No, that'd be excellent. One of the things too, I know with some of your work, especially at Pipeline Medical, there was some pivotal moments where you actually were leading the turnaround there. Could you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I came in as CEO in 2017, kind of middle of the time there. I was number 4 as the employee. The company was not really growing, not really diversified in terms of where their revenue was coming in from and their client base, and frankly losing money. So over the past, well, now almost 8 years, I've been really growing, scaling, and building pipeline to what it is today. So correcting a lot of those issues, and then there's always a turnaround, right? When you look at companies in general, no one has this perfectly linear or exponential growth. It's more ebony than flowing or stair step growth. So there's always a little different types of turnarounds that you got to do during the way. Really taking pipeline from where it was then and where it is today is just a huge undertaking and quite an achievement. Not really for myself, but for the entire organization and every employee that is there and has been there in the past to help make it happen.
Yeah, it's really amazing to see what you've done there. And, as you think about some of those different steps along the way, what were some of the leadership challenges that you faced to help kind of get it to the next plateau?
Yeah, I think with every, entrepreneur, so as you grow in business, your job function and job responsibilities and duties changes over time as well, along with your leadership team, right? So when you're starting off in a small company, or if you're an entrepreneur by yourself, where you're growing with hundreds of people, that job function changes, and we continually go through that as leaders today. So, for instance, when you're starting it off, you only have a handful of employees. Everyone is kind of doing everything, right? Do whatever it takes to get the company moving, keep it afloat, and you're looked at and essentially judged on how good are you at everything across the board, and is the company moving in the right direction. When you get larger, though, that obviously can't happen, and it just is an inefficient way to scale and to grow. So you start looking at these job functions and job description and who is doing what, and really narrowing in your focus and your responsibilities as you get larger as a company and an organization. So each person's job responsibilities go from this extremely wide breadth to a much more narrow scope. So that's obviously something that is a challenge for me, and I think everybody on my leadership and employees that have been here for more than probably 3 or 4 years, is learning how to handle that mental shift. The other is just elevating and delegating, and and that comes along with that change of, hey, I can't do everything anymore. Who am I going to delegate it to? And as you're elevating yourself and delegating those responsibilities, what you're focusing on switches. So, right, you're going from doing everything and overseeing everything and helping to much more narrowed. So, more, and I think you also see the transition of strategic versus executioner happen more as you grow too. So it's understanding how much time you're spending working on the business versus in the business, and being much more strategic versus executional. So it changing your mindset along the way. For myself and people that work alongside me, I know is a challenge. We all go through it. Change is not easy, but if you're going to continue to grow any company, within a company, or even yourself as a whatever career somebody chooses, they need to learn how to make those changes too.
No, I think that's such a great point, and we often call that the founder's trap, right? Where you do get stuck wearing all the hats, and I think it is a tough transition, but it sounds like you and the team have been working through that successfully, and quite exciting, right? To continue to help the company grow.
Yeah, I think we have to, and we meet weekly. Me and me and my level one leadership team, our level two leadership team, and we talk about these challenges. More often than not, it's job responsibilities, requirements, scaling, all comes into play into these conversations. We're starting to pick apart this even further with the introduction of AI, which I think every person has to go through because it's even an additional forced conversation of what can we delegate over to AI? What can we automate over to AI? What is that job function really going to be? What's everybody else going to do? And how are we going to support the AI? How are we going to support our customer? And now taking into account not just elevating ourselves as individuals and as a company, but how is the customer going to get impacted with an AI integration? So it becomes this another level, another layer of complexity when we're talking about scaling and growing.
No, absolutely, and it's amazing because I think it's only going to go faster, right? As this technology is adopted with AI. When you look at too, with some of the work that you've done, can you share your process for building strategic partnerships that you can monetize and bring value?
I mean, I would love to give you the secret sauce, but I'll give you as much as I can. So I think it's really about solving problems, right? I mean, that's what sales and that's what business is. And I think that's what keeps us passionate is if you're not trying to solve a problem, then what are you really doing? You're just pushing paper around. So, it goes back to that age old saying of defining your problem and having your problem statement is 50 to 80% of the challenge. So once you can get that right and understand a problem, then we can go solve it. And so the strategic partnerships are designed to solve those problems that we've identified. And really figuring out what your problem is, you're solving it for, putting yourself in the customer's shoes and through the lens of the customer and making that your anchor and then working backwards and then having that defined issue through the client's lens and often talking to customers and talking to stakeholders and other people that are involved in it, then you can go find the right partner, right? I think not that there's so many different partners and partnership opportunities out there depending what we talk about, but finding the right partner for that problem is less of an issue once we've defined that problem. So I think that is ultimately your secret sauce, and then going to figure out how to build on top of that.
No, absolutely. I think that's a great point. When you look at some of the work too, as you talked about the scaling and the team, what were some of the bigger challenges of really trying to help not scale chaos, right? Because like you said, the individuals you mentioned in terms of narrowing in on, but with the organization as a whole, what were some of the challenges that you had to address there?
And so when I look at that's a great question, John. When I look at myself, that's a blind spot of mine
Mhm.
that I've been able to uncover. I love speed. I love to move fast, which often means breaking things and asking for forgiveness and not acceptance, right? Mm. And when you're a young company and smaller, you can do that. And the downstream impact on the organization or the client is small. And as you get bigger, it gets larger, it compounds. So this is something I constantly work on. And for me, it's finding the right people to surround myself with that I can use as sounding boards, guiding lights, gut checks, however you want to frame it. But here's what I'm thinking we're doing. Here's why we're going to do it. This is why it's so important for X reason. And getting the feedback from a feedback loop that are people that are intimately involved within the organization and whatever you're going to be adjusting or growing or scaling or doing or leading. So I think for me, that's been my biggest thing is hire people that are smarter than you or better than you, and you be able to utilize them because you all grow with that, right? We're all only good at certain things, so we might as well find what we're not good at and surround us by those people.
Yeah, I think that's so important, right? And I think that that's sort of that servant leader mindset as well, right? Where you understand that you really do need to have the right folks in the organization and recognize that you need to be able to lean on them for the right tasks.
You do. And it's hard to learn that, right? Because for the most part, people are attracted to themselves, their
Mhm.
personalities to a degree, right? Like you have a mindset, and a lot of the times that's derived from somebody you would want to hang out with, somebody because they're similar to you. But ultimately, sometimes those people that are so similar to you would not be the best people to be alongside you when you're making really big, important decisions.
Yeah, I think that's such an important thing to recognize, right? It's sort of that diversity of thought, really having folks that can challenge and find those blind spots for you.
Yeah. Yeah. And so we try to create a culture within the organization where we can have these really open conversations with each other about those blind spots and these problems challenges, because without having that full trust and communication, knowing that people can challenge each other um, without any repercussion is the way that we've been able to be successful and grow, right? Otherwise, if people are timid, too shy, or too scared because of what ripple or domino effect that might cause, or who they're potentially worried to upset, then what are we doing? We're just saying yes to everybody, which is never gonna help accelerate us or anyone. So
Yeah,
creating that culture is so critical, I think, too.
I completely agree with you. When you look at that too, I'm sure it's been a large focus to be able to maintain that culture as you grow rapidly as well. Are there any things that you would recommend to other leaders as you've gone through some of that?
It is hard, and we're fully remote right now, and, we're pushing a decent amount of people to be fully remote. So we're trying to figure that out ourselves. One some things that we've implemented are different skip level meetings in different places, different leadership different leadership meetings at different levels, allowing cross collaboration with different teams and business units. Various probably 4 times or so a year, 5 times a year, we'll do big town hall events. We'll bring in outside speakers or activities to really engage people. We've been fortunate enough to have, even though we're virtual and international, so we're fortunate enough to have different pockets in different areas that we can come together a couple times a year as well. So everybody from different countries come within that country come together, and we'll be together for, whether it's a meal or maybe it's a multi-day offsite. So those sorts of events happen as well, just to help create that collaboration and teamwork.
Yeah, and that's so important, especially too when you start talking about multinational, being able to really help make sure all the views are taken in. When you look at some of the two, do you have any advice that you would give other founders or early, I'd say, entrepreneurial type companies, what you would do to help them monetize innovation, or how can they do that without having to sacrifice capital efficiency or culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is figure out how to self-fund it, right? If you're not gonna, if you're capital constrained and you're trying to figure out how to, not risk capital, how do you self-fund? So there's an expression that we've adopted from one of our board members, which is crawl, walk, run, right? When you're bringing on a new concept, new idea, new innovation, start small and then grow bigger. And as you do that, you're able to essentially self fund using the profits that you've just created in the stage before to reinvest into the next stage. So you're essentially playing with house money. So realizing that it's okay to start small and you're never going to get everything you want is probably one of the bigger takeaways that I've had to figure out how to adopt and accept and learn and love. I want everything right now, as my team would tell you, and learning that, hey, you can't do that. And we got to come up with different phase approaches allows us to be sustainable, and is one big piece of advice I would make sure to give people as well. Right. There's no reason to bet everything right off the bat. So
No,
iterate, iterate and move forward.
yeah, I think that's so huge, and it is like you said, if you're able to do those small iterations, they slowly get a little bit bigger, right? And then you can do more and more.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we're a little bit. as a society, blinded, or blind is not going to be the right word, but I'll use it at the moment. So blinded by just the struggle and the time that these large companies that seem like are overnight successes really take to materialize, right? Like nothing is an overnight success. There was thousands of iterations upon thousands of hours and dozens of years in most cases for a company to be a recognizable household name. It doesn't just pop up overnight because you saw it online. And they've done that, right? They've taken the time to kind of go through that process. They put in that elbow work and they put in the sweat equity to get there. So I think that's the other reminder is like it just there's no there's no shortcut to success is really the big takeaway that people need to remember.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think, one of the things I really like some of the work that Steve Blank has done with, really the lean innovation process, because it's much like you described, right? You want to create these rapid learning cycles so that you can iterate and take risk out as you go. But, it's a series of lots of experiments that you end up finally getting to the end result.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to I'm glad you said that, right? So that's what we look at with marketing. That's what we look at with our tech team. We are recent over the last couple of years, we've migrated into a sprint cadence, right? So every 2 weeks, we're doing different releases from our tech team because we can make that iterations. We can do smaller changes. We can adjust. Where prior it was much slower, longer release dates with probably more stuff packed in, but they would require such a lot more additional changes afterwards and change requests. Once we compressed our timeline for releasing, this is again in technology stuff and our website and platform. Once we compressed down to 2 weeks, we just accelerated from there, and have been doing so ever since. Trying to find how we can use that 2 week or weekly cadence with other departments and other teams, is something of interest.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And I think that's a great example too, right? Sometimes by going a little bit smaller, you actually can go faster, which is
Yeah.
counterintuitive, I think sometimes. But no, I think this is just a like huge insight. I appreciate that. And when you look at some of the other things, especially when you try to balance some of those sprints, could you speak a little bit to the work of the cross functional aspects to the teams that you have to get involved to actually drive success?
Yeah, I mean, so if we're talking about technology, is that what we're talking about? From technology, we have multiple different we have got a tech lead essentially. And within that project, we have a tech project lead. And so they oversee that component. We've got either a project manager, a product manager, or a BA that's integrating and working across over in the business side of the house
Mhm.
to make sure that the business has, that everything is scoped essentially correctly on what the business need is. And then we have a business lead that has full accountability and ownership as well. So every project has, a tech lead, a business and a business lead. And you might have multiple business leads from different functions, but you have a single arching point of accountability as well. So you might have a level one business owner that has entire accountability from the business side of the project. Then that project might have multiple components, and each one of those components has a different leader, right? So it's structured in a hierarchy. And it's extremely important, as I'm sure you know, John, just to make sure you have one person being accountable. Otherwise, you point the finger at the other person. So as long as somebody is accountable and structured in that sense, then we can set up the right meetings, right cadence to make sure the right collaboration, whatever, however we're collaborating happens. But then you know who to turn to for, to praise when that thing is done and done correctly as well.
Absolutely.
It
And
goes back to a book, right? Extreme Ownership that I read, and it's all about just being fully accountable up and down the organization because ultimately you are the responsible person, right? And if you assign the wrong, in this example, if you're the business owner of the project and you assign the wrong person downstream of you to take ownership of a certain function and they fail, ultimately you fail because you're the one that made that decision and didn't hold that person accountable. I think that's the big takeaway as we look to work collaboratively across teams.
I really like that example because I think when you're talking culture earlier, right? The accountability is part of your culture. The direct communications part of the culture. It really is, kind of that accountability is the glue that kind of keeps everything working smoothly.
Accountability is a glue, and I think oftentimes it gets overlooked is your core values, your vision statement, those sorts of things within the company, be able to referencing those and find different areas to reference them throughout the business in the course of your business day, right? So our HR has done a great job on putting together like shout outs and ways that you can recognize other people. And to submit a shout out, you need to utilize which core value they've shown. So we're constantly trying to find ways and iterate on how we can deepen those core values within the organization.
And speaking of core values, what would you actually characterize the core values for the company?
So yeah, I knew that was going to come. So I mean, we've got you pointing right up. We've got 7 of them right here. So I could read them off, or what would you like?
Sure. No, I think it's just helpful because sometimes folks having the example right of the core values, I think that sets the tone for the culture, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think it gets overlooked from time to time, but it's really what and I think your core values can change. That's
Mhm.
the other important thing. As we grow up in a company, and we talked about this earlier on, from this very entrepreneurial to a much more, you know, corporate driven company as you're growing, your core values are going to change too. And that's completely okay. And I think it makes sense. Ultimately, your core values are what the CEO or founder or that individual really sees as that guiding light that you are looking for everybody within the organization to show, on a daily basis. And if you're doing it correctly, again, it's in things like shout outs and recognitions, but it's also in your hiring process to make sure they're able to show those items. It's in your annual review process. So it's really integrated into the company. If we're going to draw a parallel, like your core values are kind of when you're dating, if for those that have dated or in the dating world, right? You've got criteria of what you're looking for in a partner, and you're not going to just kind of blindly say, yeah, this is my new partner over here without knowing what their values are. The same idea within a company. And I think we forget that from time to time because we're so focused on growth and kind of in the business, not so much on the business.
I think that's a very great point because, like you said, you can easily get lost, right? If you are not focused on what are those core values that are driving and kind of the guiding, kind of the north star, right, of where you're going.
Of course.
Well, this is I've really enjoyed our conversation too. Are there anything that you'd like to share too from your background with the audience before we wrap it up?
I think my big takeaway for anybody that's listening out there is don't be scared to jump in wherever you're at with whatever you're at. All right. If you've got an inkling or burning desire to try building a company or innovate or find some way to monetize, take that chance. Right. Your biggest challenge is going to be that you regretted not doing it if you ever not do it. Right. So like we're always like there's plenty of entrepreneurs out there, solopreneurs, everything else. If you're looking for something, you've got an idea, just do it. Like the worst that's going to happen is you're going to fall back on what you're doing today. Right.
Yeah, and I do have to compliment you as well because I think it's very impressive too, right? To be able to go from the early stages and successfully make that scaling transition, because it kind of makes you a little schizophrenic at times. You're trying to harness that, yeah, entrepreneurial energy, but then also harness, okay, now we got to put things on a more scaled approach.
I appreciate that. You're right. It's hard going from entrepreneur to a scale. I give my wife a ton of credit for me from hearing me and listening to me and being my kind of guiding light behind the scenes and making sure that I'm focused and helping me think about what's going on and how I'm going to elevate the company and myself. My board and having the trust and support in me and belief that I can do it as well. So I really appreciate John, but it's one of those, right? It goes back to your support structure, right? Like I told you earlier, hey, it's critical to have a support structure of your leadership team, but your support structure of yourself and what you're doing is just as important. So whether it's your coaches, your boards, your partner, they all play a huge role in getting you as an individual to where you need to be. And so, I mean, I appreciate that. I mean, and it has been a huge effort, and I'll take a little bit of that compliment. But I also, it needs to be shared with, like I said, everybody that's been there by my side during the whole time, because I wouldn't have been able to be successful if it was not for them.
That is so true and so powerful. I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, of
Well,
course.
well, again, thank you so much for your time today. I really have enjoyed it. And I think our listeners are going to be thrilled to hear your insights. And we'll definitely stay in touch and hopefully have you back on again sometime soon.
Would love that. Thank you again, John.
Thank you.